So speaking about developer productivity, you mentioned Microsoft has been doing this research for many years. In the first place, why you came up with this space developer productivity framework, which was recently launched like a few months back on ACM, right? If I'm not wrong.
Yep.
So what led to that research paper actually?
That's a great question. So, this paper was co authored by some brilliant people. Nicole Forsgren, many of you will know as a founder of DevOps and the author of Accelerate, and Peggy Story, who's a researcher at UVic and studies these kinds of things. All of us, whether it be Nicole at GitHub or us at Microsoft and Peggy in academia, we had heard people talk about productivity. And especially with COVID, everyone was asking, are people productive working from home? And we saw papers coming out and news articles saying, oh, yeah, PRs are up and check ins are up or lines of code are steady. We're good. And we thought, that's not productivity. Like, you're not really measuring it. So I think the paper came out of a bit of a desire to explain from an academic, well grounded, researched point of view what productivity is, really to help companies. At least that was my take. I'm definitely the most junior out of those amazing people on the paper. But we were nervous that companies were making these broad decisions to remain remote based on 3 months of check in data. And they thought that was sufficiently measuring the productivity of their employees. And we knew that missed a lot of dimensions that could potentially be at risk and that doing this long term might not be great. So we wanted to give people a broader view of what it was, almost to future proof, because we know that some of the issues we're seeing slowly creep up in productivity could potentially impact innovation down the line. You might not see it if you only measure developer activity, which is what a lot of people were doing instead of measuring productivity.
So if I hear you correctly, in terms of measuring development productivity, we should not just focus on the output and the activities. What should we focus on instead then?
So the SPACE framework gave 5 different dimensions of looking at productivity. Activity was just one of them. So the acronym SPAC, that's for these 5 different dimensions. Our recommendation was that you pick at least 3 of them when you're trying to measure productivity. So activity is one, and that tends to be the one that we go to first. And it's often the easiest to measure, and we have telemetry. But there's other pieces of the puzzle. So we wanted to look at things like collaboration and satisfaction and well-being. In fact, for years, we've known that satisfaction is a great sort of proxy measure. So looking at how your people are feeling as they do their work, while I think some people thought, oh, I don't really care how my employees are feeling. Well, it's actually a great leading indicator that they might become burnt out and your activity metrics will be impacted, right? So looking at satisfaction and well-being for the S, looking at performance, so how the system is actually working together. So not just the individuals, not necessarily their performance, but altogether, how is everything going down the pipe, the whole DevOps process. Looking at, again, activity, those things that we're kind of used to measuring, maybe PRs or bug fixes, collaboration and communication, because how people work together, especially in today's world of large software products, is really important. And then efficiency and flow, which I think is one that any engineer understands. Like, they know when they're in the flow, they know when they're feeling good. And you can look at that from an individual or even a team or organization level when things seem to be moving well and working. So picking metrics somewhere at least from 3 of those categories is a better way to be looking at productivity.
In terms of new future of work, what are some of the predictions that would happen? For example, if the pandemic is prolonged or the
Mm.
pandemic suddenly just finished one day.
So one of the things that we think is pretty clear is that hybrid work at least is here to stay. So we're never going to go fully back. There's not going to be this going back to normal. There's going to be hybrid work to different degrees. What we're concerned about with that is we want to make sure that we're actually building the future we want and not just accepting the future that's coming. Because if you look at how the pandemic has influenced people, there's been a lot of social problems. People who were able to go to remote work were more likely to be white and well off. People who were people of color or poor were more likely to have to continue to work out in the world. So if we continue with hybrid work the way it is, we might exacerbate some of those discrepancies. Same with people who don't have as much money, might not have good enough internet to work effectively remotely. They might not be able to turn on their computer. This was an issue with students where some students couldn't turn their camera on and be able to hear the teacher well enough without it becoming choppy. And so they didn't get as equal of an opportunity. Whereas previously a classroom or a physical office space were levelers of opportunity where everyone was equal and everyone was on the same playing field. So we know that hybrid work is going to continue. but we want to make sure that it comes in a way that's equitable and everyone gets to experience the benefits of it if they would like to. So that's one thing. Another thing that we're hoping is that since hybrid work is going to happen, that's actually in a lot of ways harder for companies than either of the two places we've been before. So we used to have everyone in the office. Now we have everyone remote. Soon we're going to have this mix, and that's actually going to become really complicated. Another equity issue that can come from that is that the people in the room are the real first-class citizens, and the digital people who are there aren't. So a great thing with the pandemic was people who worked remote before, they said, hey, I feel finally like I'm really part of the team and everyone gets it. And these people who used to kind of be forgotten on the screen while you had a meeting, people were looking to them like, how do you do it? How do you work? And they were the fancy people. So we are worried when we go back, we don't want to go back to that. We don't want to go back to a place where maybe half your team decides to be remote and none of their opinions count as much. Or we see decisions happening as you leave the conference room walking down the hallway and they're not actually there for that part. So we're looking at that. That's a prediction we have is, hey, the experience used to be not equitable for people who weren't physically present. We need to design our software and our systems and our processes so that it is fair and equitable for everyone, whether you're in the room or not. So I know Microsoft especially is putting a lot of research into what do the telepresence things look like, or what do the conference rooms look like so that everyone has a similar experience. That's fun. I was actually in a meeting the other day with someone and they said, John, be quiet. And I'm like, what is he talking about? John wasn't on the meeting. I'm just using John as an example. And I thought, what are they talking about? Finally, they moved their camera so we could see. And one of those little rolly computers had wheeled into their office. And it was a coworker who was working from a totally different country, but was using a physical robot to come and bother them in their office and ask them a question. And I thought, this is amazing. This is the future. People are going to wheel into my office as virtual robot telepresence machines. It was the coolest thing. That guy was literally on the other side of the world at that time. And this was happening. And then I was in a third country watching this happen in front of me. So there's lots of fun research in that space of how do we make sure that everyone's there when not everyone is there. And so that's another prediction that we have. That's coming, and we don't want it to be like it was before.
So speaking about all this technology enablement, another episode that I had quite recently is talking about the impact of 5Gs. I think with the 5G becoming more prevalent, many of such technologies will become widely available. Speaking about equitable, equal opportunity for people, hopefully with these technologies becoming more and more prevalent, people will be able to tap into those.